Hi, I'm Ken with Demmer Audio Video Solutions. This is a quick video to show you how to solder an XLR audio connector. Alright, we're going to put a male XLR end on a piece of mic cable here. As you can see, most XLR connectors have 4 different pieces. This is a Neutrik XLR connector, the most common. It's the kind we use all day on installs. So always start with this here. Put this little boot part on first. If not, you'll have to cut it and redo it again. And then this one, slightly take off the shield without cutting too much of the metal. We like to just bend it like this and score it. Let it actually rip so you don't cut. You can see the metal in there. Alright, let's get that off of there. This part's kind of a pain in the neck. Peel these back. Get them back as you want to make all these little loose things into one wire. Sometimes a knife helps. This is good to know if you have a bunch of bad mic cables. So they go out and buy new ones. These connectors really only cost $3 to $4 a piece. Okay. So I'll show you a little trick to make it easier to solder. Take this, take the copper that's in there and the shield. Some wire is different, it doesn't. And take a small gauge on your crimper. This one goes down to 20. And let's cut that. What it'll do, kind of score it in there, it'll thin a lot of that wire out. We don't need as much as there for this connection. Maybe we could do it one more time here. Mic wire is usually like a 22, 24 gauge wire, very, very thin. Doesn't hold much current. All right, and now twist that. There we go. Okay, here's our other two. Let's get this coating out of the way. All right, so let's tin this wire first. Strip a little bit back on that one. Let's cut this like that and cut it short if we can. Strip these. Maybe give that a little twist there. Oops. Keep it in the camera. Alright. This is where you need that third arm. Some guys will put the iron in the vise. It's totally cool. There we go. Okay. Now let's jump to the connector part. This is the part we actually solder here. You can see there's 3 different pins on this XLR. 1, 2, and 3. And the way that works is pin 1 is usually the ground or the shield part of a cable. Pin 2 is with the hot or sometimes white, sometimes red, just depending on the kind of wire you have. And the number 3 is usually the black, usually like the negative side of the audio signal. So what we'll do is we'll put this in the vise, because it's very, very hard to do this without the whole third hand technique. So we tin the wire already. Now we're going to kind of do the same theory to the connector. So we want to fill up the connector with solder. All right. Now the trick is not to try to solder the two together. It's basically there's solder on the connector, there's solder on the wire. Heat the solder up and let the two just kind of fall together. Makes things a lot simpler. Let's start with the ground on this one. Let's heat this back up. Just put it in there. Just let it cool down. That was pin number 1. Do pin number 3. Just going from left to right. No rule. Oh. There we go. Let it cool down. That looks pretty good. So now we put it together, and you can see there's not a lot of wire here coming out. So I've seen some mistakes where they have the wire way back, or though you'll see where I stripped it and soldered it in, also very, very close. If that were too far back, you could accidentally twist the wire and the connections would cross, which is definitely something you don't want. So we take that little tab, put it on top of this tab, slide it in there. Let's take our boot, which I put on earlier, which I mentioned. You don't want to forget. I've done it for 15 years, and I still forget once in a while. Crank it down. There you go. Connection's nice and tight. What's nice about the Neutrik connections, they have a very, very good strain relief. All right, I just showed you a male connector. Let me show you the female. It's almost the same thing, just the two of the pins are in the opposite direction. So once again, don't forget to put the boot on. Let's strip a little bit of this back. You could try to use a pair of wire strippers for this kind of material, but I've always found the knife to be simpler. All right. If you really wanted to be fancy, you could actually take a small piece of heat shrink and put some shrink over this connector. Some really high-end XLR cables, that's something they brag about, is they'll heat shrink that connection. Doesn't hurt, but I'll be honest with you, we've done thousands of these without, and hasn't been a problem yet. Okay. Looks pretty good. Let's check the length on the cable. You could probably take it back a little bit. Never want too long. All right, let's strip this. I stripped those a little long, and I'll show you here in a minute how to fix that. So, tin these wires. Seems like a pain in the neck to tin them every time, but it really makes it for a better hold. It makes it much simpler. Sometimes you'll heat it up in the connector and then push the wire in. It just won't. It'll push the solder out of the way because it's not hot enough for the solder to stick to it. Put some more on this one. I wanted to show you something. Say a situation like this where the wires are really stripped back too far, and I mentioned when they're in the connector, if you turn them, they could cross. So after you put the solder on, you could simply just give them a little snip. They're actually really easy to cut with the solder on. Now this connector is going to be different. This is the female end, so the pin 1 and 2 are going to be different. On the XLR, this was 1 and 2. Now this is pin 1, this is pin 2, this is pin 3. Everything's still, you know, the numbers still go to the right color of wire or connectors. It's just you have to watch. You don't want to accidentally switch them. Oh, it's the same thing before. We're just going to fill this connector up with solder first. And as far as tools go, I'm using very basic stuff here. The soldering iron I have is a really basic soldering iron. It does have like the variable temperature control, but not one of those fancy digital readout ones. I've owned those in the past, and they usually either get stolen or lost. And in all honesty, this is a $20 soldering iron that works just as well for this kind of stuff. So we'll just work left and right. It's easier for me to reach on the camera here. Done with that. We'll do pin 2 first. Once again, heat it up. Put this in there and just let the two kind of melt together. All right. This is the black wire. Pin 3. A little bit long on the lead. I think we can put the excess down in there so it won't stick out. The female connectors have a pretty deep well. There we go. You don't have to blow on the connector, you can wait. Same thing. Give it a second. All right, looks good. So let's take our boot. Put this on there. Just double check, yeah. Looks perfect. All right, ready to go. There you have it. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can see that it's not a very complicated process at all, and this process will save you a lot of money down the road. Most of the time what happens to a mic cord is the connection gets bad either like right here or somewhere right here from getting moved. So if you check a mic cord, you know which end's bad. Just take back a few inches, cut it, and just put a new end on it. And you know, a good mic cord could be $25, $30, where like I mentioned before, the connectors are $3 or $4. So you get really efficient, and it'll help you out. And also, if you need to make an adapter, you need to go from like an XLR to a 1/4 inch or a TRS or an RCA. Those adapters are usually fairly expensive. What in reality, the connectors really only cost a couple bucks. If there's a topic you'd like for us to cover, feel free to send us an email at ken@demmerav.com.